My dear students, welcome to my talk on reproductive cycles in mammals, part 2, that is about menstrual cycle. I am Dr. MEERA B.K, Associate Professor and Head, Department of Zoology, Maharani Science College for Women, Palace Road, Bangalore 1. After the talk, in case there are any queries and clarifications which need to be sought, you can contact me over my cell phone number which is there on this slide or even through my email ID. Let us begin our class today now. In case of humans, other old world monkeys and apes, there is deviation from typical estrocycle. They practice what is known as menstrual cycle. For the sake of understanding this menstrual cycle, I am taking the example of human females only. After puberty, non-pregnant, sexually normal human female runs uninterrupted reproductive cycles known as menstrual cycle, which lasts for about 28 days approximately. However, many factors influence this duration of cycle of 28 days. Factors like nutrition, even extrinsic factors like environment, temperature, hormonal milieu, psychosomatic factors, and so many things. For the sake of convenience of study, the menstrual cycle is divided into two substages as depicted in this slide. One stage is first stage is at the level of ovary. At the level of ovary, two phases can be recognized. One before ovulation, that is from day 1 to day 30, called follicular phase, and the other after ovulation, that is from day 15 to 28, called luteal phase. The follicular phase is under the hormonal influence of FSH and estrogen, whereas the luteal phase is under the hormonal influence of LH and progesterone. I'll come to it little later. Then, at the level of uterus, four phases can be recognized the way I have presented in this slide. First one, menses stage or menstruation. This occurs for a duration of 5 days, starting from day 1 to the day 5. The functionalis layer of the uterus, which measures about 7 millimeters in height, at this moment is slotched off along with lot of blood and uterine glands. This phase is characterized by visible flow of blood. Before getting into the other stages, let me just tell you a brief account of internal genitalia of human females. You can see at the right corner below the internal genitalia diagram where you find a pair of ovaries and a pair of fallopian tubes. The fallopian tubes join the uterus, and the uterus has three parts anatomically: a blind ending fundus, a body, and a cervix. And the uterus will continue as vagina. And right now, we should understand the structure of the uterus in little bit detail, because menstruation happens at uterus. The uterine wall consists of three layers from outside to inwards. The outermost layer is a serous coat. Second one is thick muscular coat called myometrium, and the inner one is mucous membrane or endometrium. This layer undergoes characteristic changes during menstrual cycle. The endometrium is histologically made up of two layers, such as basalis, which is the permanent layer measuring about 1 millimeter in length, and functionalis, the height of which varies anything between 0 and 7 millimeters depending upon the stage of menstrual cycle. Basalis is not slotched off during menstruation. Ultimately, it is the functionalis which is slotched off during menstruation. Then further, one more background information what you need to know is endometrium is supplied with two kinds of blood vessels. Number one, straight arterioles that supply to the basalis, and spiral arterioles that supply to the functionalis. Now, with this background, we shall study the other three stages of menstrual cycle at the level of uterus. We have already gone through the menses phase that lasts from day 1 to day 5. The second phase is known as repair phase. As the menses is being completed, by about 4th day, the injured endometrium is subjected to a process of repair, characterized by epithelialization, that is formation of new epithelium. This phase is called repair phase and takes place for 2 days, that is from day 4 to the day 6. This is followed by proliferation phase. This phase starts from the day 7 and comes to an end by about 15th day. It is characterized by the proliferation of the uterine endometrium, that is functionalis layer of endometrium. When repair and proliferative phases are undergoing in uterine endometrium, at the level of ovary, follicular phase would have got completed and Graafian follicle would be ready to release the ovum. On the 14th day, ovulation occurs and corpus luteum is formed. The Graafian follicle, after ovulation, transforms itself into a post-ovulatory body known as corpus luteum. Then the proliferation phase is followed by secretory phase. This phase starts from day 16 and runs till day 28. This phase is said to set in when the uterine glands start secreting progesterone. At this stage, functionalis reaches a maximum height of 7 millimeters. When once fertilization and subsequent gestation, that is pregnancy, does not occur, the functionalis becomes hyperplasic and is slotched off, which is visible as menses. By now, at the level of ovary, the corpus luteum would get transformed into a scar called corpus albicans. So this slide represents the schematic view of a single menstrual cycle, what all I explained till now. Now let us understand the mechanism of menstruation. So whatever is there in the slide, I have simply briefed here. At ovarian level, the follicular phase and luteal phase. At uterine level, menses, day 1 to day 5. Repair phase, day 4 to day 6. Proliferative phase, day 7 to day 15. And secretory phase, day 16 to day 28. Then I have already briefed about the histology of wall of the uterus, about perimetrium, myometrium and endometrium. Endometrium having two layers, basalis and functionalis. Functionalis being further divided into spongiosa and compacta. This is the picture of uterus showing the lumen in the center and followed by the various layers of endometrium which are the seats of menstruation. Endometrium is followed by myometrium, which consists of smooth muscle fibers, that is followed by perimetrium. Now, with this background, we shall understand the mechanism of initiation of menstruation. The uterine endometrium, as I told you, is histologically made up of two layers, basalis and functionalis. The basalis is 1 millimeter in height and is the permanent layer of endometrium. In the sense, it is not slouched off during menstruation. It is highly vascularized and the arteries found here are straight arteries. On the other hand, functionalis is not a permanent layer and is slouched off during menstruation. The height of functionalis varies as per the phase of menstruation cycle. It is further differentiated into two layers, as I have already told you, compacta and spongiosa. The superficial compacta is situated distal to the spongiosa and named so because of its compact arrangement. Underlying the compacta is the spongiosa, in which uterine glands are situated. This layer is also highly vascularized. From straight arteries of basalis, during post-ovulatory period, temporary characteristic arterioles arise which get into the functional endometrium. These are known as spiral arterioles. Just before the menses, the spiral arterioles start contracting one by one, as a consequence of which the functionalis part does not get any circulation. This is known as ischemia or physiological ischemia, which correlates with transformation of corpus luteum into corpus albicans at the level of ovary. To bring about the contraction of uterine endometrium, another hormone called relaxin is produced along with the necessary enzymes. At this juncture, the endometrial tissue starts degenerating. Due to constriction, blood vessels get injured. As a result, the blood along with the endometrium is sludged off to the exterior via the vaginal orifice. By this time, the repair phase would have already begun in the uterus. By the end of proliferation phase, the endometrium reaches a height of 2 to 3 millimeters. At this stage, uterine glands would be thinner, producing a thin secretion. During secretory phase, the uterine glands become thick and are found to elaborate a secretion which is highly rich in glycogen and mucoid cells. At this stage, menses starts if fertilization doesn't occur. If successful intercourse and subsequent fertilization occur, totally a different course of events take place and physiological amenorrhea, that is cessation of menstruation temporarily, appears, which persists for few months even after parturition. Parturition is a technical term for delivery. In a conceived woman, the corpus luteum does not get transformed into scar-like corpus albicans. Instead, starts secreting more of progesterone and thus becomes highly functional. The functionalis still rises in height. The ovum, after fertilization, forms blastocyst which gets itself implanted to the uterine endometrium. This process is known as implantation or nidation, which is followed by placentation and gestation. So, two things may happen, one in case of absence of pregnancy and one in case of happening of pregnancy. Then, as I told you, both estrous cycle as well as menstrual cycle are under neuroendocrine regulation. How exactly the regulation is brought about, let us understand. The slide whatever here I have given gives you a schematic representation depicting the neuroendocrine regulation of menstruation. Please understand this. The proliferative phase of endometrium represents the estrogenic part of the menstrual cycle. It is initiated and controlled by estrogen secreted from ovary. Estrogen in turn is under the control of hormone FSH from anterior pituitary or Edna hypophysis. The secretory phase of the endometrium is controlled by progesterone, although the effect of progesterone is obtained only after the endometrium has been sensitized with estrogen. At this stage, you should understand one concept. The hormones which function simultaneously, that means for one hormone to function, the presence of another hormone, at least in minimal quantities, is needed. Then we say those two hormones are synergistic in function. Here also, estrogen and progesterone are synergistic in function. So, for progesterone to function, at least minimal quantities of estrogen needs to be present. Now, let us try to understand this schematic representation. Although the activity of endometrium is directly controlled by ovarian function and by the release of two hormones from ovary, the estrogen and progesterone, the ovary itself is under the control of pituitary gland, that is hypophysis, the secretions of which are under the control of hypothalamus, and here the regulation is nervous, not hormonal. Hence we say neuroendocrine regulation, not just endocrine regulation. At puberty, the hypothalamus in the brain starts pulsatile secretion of GnRH, that is gonadotrophic release hormone, resulting in the activation of hypothalamo-hypophyseal ovarian uterine axis in the establishment of menstrual cycles. Pulsatile GnRH initiates secretion of FSH and LH from adenohypophysis. FSH stimulates the growth of few primordial follicles into Graafian follicles. The Graafian follicle, under the influence of FSH, together with only a minimal amount of LH, secretes 17 beta estradiol. This 17 beta estradiol has three functions to perform. Number one, it produces proliferative changes in uterine endometrium. It inhibits further secretion of FSH from anterior pituitary, and it stimulates anterior pituitary to secrete LH. Then, inhibin is another hormone produced by Graafian follicle, which is also responsible for a fall in FSH level and stimulation of LH secretion. The maximum peak of estrogen secretion is seen about 48 hours before ovulation, that is on 12th and 13th day, whereas LH peak occurs about 24 to 36 hours before ovulation. The LH or the luteinizing hormone has two functions. One is it stimulates Graafian follicle to secrete 17 beta estradiol. It causes the follicle to rupture at ovulation and form corpus luteum. The corpus luteum secretes progesterone, the level of which starts rising. The progesterone has two functions. It stimulates endometrium to undergo secretory hypertrophy, and it inhibits further secretion of LH by adenohypophysis. The gonadotrophins seem to have no direct effect upon the endometrium of the uterus. In the absence of pregnancy, both estrogen and progesterone levels decline gradually, and the fall in the level of these hormones brings about menstruation. A fall in the level of these hormones also starts off a fresh positive feedback mechanism and triggers the hypothalamus to release gonadotrophins. This is how the menstrual cycle is regulated. The luteal phase, that is the time between ovulation and menstruation, is fairly constant, 14 days in a menstrual cycle. The growth of ovarian follicle can be studied by daily ultrasound, estrogen, LH and mid-luteal progesterone levels, which can be conveniently and specifically measured by RAS. RAS stands for radioimmunoassays. My dear students, with this I end my talk on menstrual cycle. Thank you for patient listening. Any queries, any questions, please do contact me either at my cell phone or at my email ID. Stay blessed. Thanks.